We've been working our way through this four-step system for side control. We've seen the first thing is all about penetrating your opponent's elbow. We've seen the two major methods of doing that will be underhooks and reverse overhooks. Then we saw the idea of carrying our opponent's elbow out of position, okay, of separating the elbow away from the torso. We've seen that unlike the mounted position where the separation occurs over the shoulder line, in the case of side control, the separation occurs with the elbow going towards the center line across the body. Okay, so it's a fundamental difference between mount and side position. We've seen how to get the elbow going in that direction. Then we looked at the idea, thirdly, of control grips or control positions, where you can cement your opponent's arm in these vulnerable positions, the elbow across the center line. And we saw three of these. The idea is the control positions transfer the focus of control from our arms to our legs, so that we're using our legs to wrestle against our opponent's head and arms. If you can do that, you can beat bigger, stronger opponents. Finally, all this is designed to take you towards submission holds, and that's where we find ourselves now. Now, understand that the side control system that I teach is really focused around 4 major submission holds. That's a relatively small number. But also understand that of these 4 submission holds, and they are Jujigatami, the armbar, triangle, Kimura, and rear strangle. Those are the 4 major submissions. There are other submissions. I will be teaching them later on in this video, but these are used more opportunistically. They are not used every single day, every single time. Those 4 submissions, Jujigatami armbar, triangle, Kimura, and the rear strangle, you'll be using every day for the rest of your career out of side control situations. So they're the major 4. Now guys, please understand when I talk about these, I'm talking about the family of submissions. So when I talk about a triangle, that could mean up to 5 different forms of triangle. When I talk about Jujigatami, that might take up to 7 different varieties of Jujigatami. In the case of Kimura, it might mean Kimura perform with my hands, or it might mean Kimura perform with my legs. Okay, they're all focused around the actual mechanics of the move rather than the specific move itself. Now, if this was just a beginner's text on side control, I would just show you the basic armbar, the basic triangle. But that's not going to help you guys much at the advanced level that I'm hoping to push you guys towards. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you not the submissions in isolation, but rather I'm going to show how they occur out of those 3 control positions, because that's how you're going to be using them at World Championship level. That's how you're going to be using them against the toughest guys in your gym. You're not just going to get a Jujigatami or get a triangle or something. Put them in a triangle. That's not going to help anyone. You've got to start with those control positions. And from there, I'm going to teach you how to go from the control position into those 4 major forms of submission. And that is how you're going to make this a much more realistic way of taking the knowledge you gain from this video and actually applying it on tough, knowledgeable, resisting opponents in the gym and in competition. Okay guys, my goal in this video is to make you effective against the toughest opponents you face. It's not about just showing you guys an armbar or a triangle or some other thing. You can learn that from watching YouTube. My goal is to give you a concrete set of steps that will guide you from beginning to end against your toughest opponents and get you through to your submission holds. It's time now that we start looking at what is my personal favorite way of using the 4-step system, and that's to get into the seated head and arm. We've seen there's 2 ways to get into seated head and arm. One is through the use of an underhook, where I punch through, I get the forearm lever in place, and from situations like this, we start this action of getting our 2 knees behind his head and then making a pass off, where I shoot my arm through, get behind my training partner, and take a series of short, choppy steps that put me behind my opponent, hip to hip. And then from here, we start that drop that puts my chest behind his deltoid and gets us into a situation where if he tries to turn back into us, it's going to be a very, very difficult thing. Then we can knee slide down and find ourselves right there. in the classic seated head and arm position. Seated head and arm creates a situation where I have two unweighted legs, so I can use my legs against my opponent and control him with my legs. Now, once we get to this position, we'll just rotate around a little bit. Nice, Kim. Good, stop. Now, from here, what I would like to do is to penetrate inside his armpit with this foot, okay? So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to place my heel right there on his forearm. I'm going to touch my own heel with my other foot. And as a result, I can use the strength of my legs to fight my opponent's arms. And as we've been saying in this video, this is the great advantage of these kinds of control position. They enable you to use the dexterity in your unweighted legs to get through and fight his arms with your legs. Even if he were stronger than me, it's an easy thing now to pop his hands apart and now penetrate the foot inside the armpit. Once we get the foot inside the armpit, you now have an ability to interfere with his ability to bring his hands together. And that's a big part in the notion of making strong people weak. Keep their hands apart from each other, or at least dominate the space between their hands. So that even if he did bring his hands together, at least my foot is on the inside, so I can use that in many effective ways. Okay. Now, once we do this kind of thing, we're going to start the action of committing down to a side. And I bring my foot over my training partner's sternum. Second foot goes out to the side like so. Okay. As we do this, we want to take our opponent's arm from a position here to a position here. This extension creates weakness, and it makes it even harder for an opponent to lock his hands together defensively. Okay, so just rotate back a little bit with me. So here's our start position, lock up. From here, we bring our feet in and we separate his hands. We get our foot to the inside. Now I'm going to come up and trap my training partner's elbow. I'm going to take my second hand in and I'm going to gather up my training partner's wrist. And as a result, I can connect his knuckles towards my chest by holding the bicep and the wrist. Now from here, I go down to a shoulder and I corkscrew my two legs like so that if he were to try and move his head, it would be kind of jammed up in my legs. Now I lock at the beginnings of a triangle. I reach and I hand assist, pulling the triangle up and cinching it tighter like a rope. Like you had a murderer's rope around your training partner's neck and you cinch it tight to lock it up. Now I put my foot right behind his oblique muscles and I come back to my training partner's wrist. As Placido tries to defend himself in this position, tries to push my knee off, tries to grab my foot and put it between his legs, tries to grab his own hands and does all those things that people do, we're now going to back heel our legs and strangle. So once again, from a situation where we start off just like so, I take my foot, I place it inside the forearm. I place my heels together, and from here, the strength of my legs easily overwhelms the strength of his hands and arms. I go forward and lock. I lock up like so. I fall down to the side, down to a shoulder, and my legs come up into this position. As a result, I can lock an initial triangle that probably won't be very tight. I grab my own foot and I cinch up high, locking things in place until my foot wedges behind his back and obliques. I connect everything up to my chest, so when he goes to lock his hands defensively, it's just not going to happen. He goes to defend himself, wildly pushing on the knees, doing all those things that people do, and then we just strangle and it's done. So taking it all the way from the top. We start off, I'll demonstrate out of an underhook, but it could also be in a reverse overhook. From here, we come up into our standard start position, head out. So there's our standard start position. We put a stuff over the head and I sweep his knee out to the side. I turn and block the head from the other side. As I sit up, I pass my hand through and block it. I block, I take short choppy steps and face around the corner. I get to that figure of 4. I drop and get my chest behind his shoulder. I connect my body to his hips. So if he tries to turn back into us, it won't be easy from here. I knee slide and sit. I take my unweighted foot and pass it through. I take my second leg out. Let's rotate to the camera. Stop. From here, with my 2 unweighted legs, I get the first foot in, lock, separate, penetrate the armpit. Lock, take the knuckles to my chest, fall to my shoulder. Lock an initial triangle, hand assist. He goes to defend himself and finds himself unable to stop. The stranglehold. Now, that's always my opening gambit out of the seated hidden arm position. You guys know I'm a huge proponent of triangles. A word to the wise. A lot of students come to me and they say, "Hey, John, I like these triangles you show, but dude, I'm 5'5". I'm almost 200 pounds. My legs are thick. Triangles just aren't my thing." Well, my answer to you is simple. Triangles from the front or from other positions may not be your thing because they are generally helped by having longer, thinner legs. But the rear triangle is the great exception to the rule. The rear triangle is by far the easiest for people with short, thick legs to enact on broad-shouldered opponents. If you are shorter in stature and thicker through the legs, this is the triangle you want to be focused on. It's an incredibly good way to attack. Now, some more good news. Not only does the rear triangle work well for almost every body type, but it's also one of the most versatile forms of submission. The triangle stranglehold itself is one of only 5 forms of submission that you can hit out of this position. Let's have a look going further into this. We'll start the other way there. I'll demonstrate it now out of a reverse overhook since I just showed how to do it out of an underhook. Now let's look at the whole thing through the reverse overhook. From a situation where I start off across my training partner's side, we've seen this idea of going through, changing the angle on a training partner until we can start that action of coming up and locking in. I put my arm in behind my training partner's head and we take those short choppy steps around the corner and lock up. Now, I drop my chest below his shoulder, and then from here, I turn my body side on. As always, you sit down, you take our unweighted foot through that gap, and pass the 2 legs through, so we have 2 unweighted legs. Let's rotate around them. Thank you. Okay, so here's our start position. This time we go in, we separate our training partner's hands. By the way, fellas, Placido's holding a good defensive grip here at the forearm. You might be asking, well, what if he gripped hand to hand? Believe it or not, it actually makes it easier. There's even more grip to work with now. The natural question is, what if he holds elbow to elbow? Okay, that also doesn't really help Placido. Okay, pretty much any grip you can break with your legs here. It's not a difficult thing. Now, this time, as we go in on our training partner, we go through, we connect his knuckles to our chest, we sit down to the side, and this time we lock up the figure of 4, and for whatever reason, the strangle's just not there. I don't know, maybe the guy's got some kind of crazy death grip inside your shin bone here, and he's pulling, and to be honest with you, let's do an experiment. Plus, pull down as hard as you can. It's not going to stop you, but for whatever reason, it's not working. Maybe the angle's wrong or something like this. In these situations, you want other alternatives. Okay, first alternative from here is a Senkaku Juji. That's a triangle into Jujigatami. So I'm going to take Placido's left arm and bring it across and over my left hip. Okay, From this position, he tries to work his way out, and then from this position, it's an easy thing to get considerable pressure. You can increase the pressure by putting it around behind you, like so. And from that lat grip position, you get even stronger Jujigatame. So once again, from a situation where for whatever reason, the triangle isn't working for you, we're going to go attacking the arm. So we pull it out, extend it, and go through. Second one, even stronger. We put it behind the body, we grab our own hips and buttocks, and go into a very powerful lock. Now, an obvious problem with this is, well, what if my opponent is very strong and bends his arm so that I can't get it straight? Okay? If you see that, just punch through and take the bent arm into this position. You can bend your arm as much as you want, Placido.
It gets worse. It gets worse.
Yeah, it's not in his interest to bend his arm. It turns it into an American lock. Okay? And then from here, I just hold the tricep and hit forward, and it gets worse. If his arm straightens defensively, then just take your elbow behind you, and you'll put a bend in it. It creates the American lock in the bend. Okay? If the hand comes out, and he starts getting his hands close to each other, then we lock Kimura in here. Now, when you see this Kimura, you're going to be like, really? You sure it works? Like, it doesn't look like it moves very far. You're like, really? You can hurt someone in that? The reason is simple, because his head can't move. The reason why most people have quite a bit of resistance to Kimura is because their head is free to move. And as you try to put pressure on the lock, the head moves, and as a result, they can put up more resistance. There's more slack in their joint. But when the head is locked in the triangle, there's almost no movement, and it breaks in a matter of millimeters. Okay? So once you get a Kimura with the head locked, even small ranges of motion result in very strong breaks. Okay? So you got to trust me on this one. It's a strong, strong lock. Now, a lot of guys are like, okay, this is bad. If he gets my arm this way, I get broken. If he gets my arm this way, I get broken. If he gets my arm this way, I get broken. So they all go short arms. And they keep the arms in close to the body like so. Okay? What I don't want is him locking his hands defensively, because that's a pretty easy thing to take care of. We can always unlock his hands. Why can we always do it? Lock it up, buddy. Because my knee is inside his bicep. That's why. So it functions here. Look, make it as strong as you can, Placido. Look how I just pull, and you can always unlock, because your knee is inside his bicep and shoulder. He can't follow you. Lock up, buddy. So when you go backwards, his right arm can't follow you. If my knee was in here, he could follow, and make it hard. But when I put my knee inside, it's a fulcrum. It makes it easy to break the grips apart. Okay? Now, from here, I'm going to cover his wrist. And as poor old Placido tries to bring his hands back, I cover the knuckles. And I put everything in here. I cover his elbow. And you get one of the nastiest wrist locks in all of jiu-jitsu. Okay? Why is it so nasty? Because the elbow is controlled. Most wrist locks out here, there's no elbow control. So he just flexes his elbow and you never get a wrist lock. Make a strong wrist. I'll never get a wrist lock on. As long as the elbow is not controlled, I'll never get to the wrist lock. But if I take his fist and his elbow, and then I just take his wrist over my wrist, it's done. Okay? So the wrist lock from this position is 10 times better than most jiu-jitsu wrist locks. Okay? So I know we've been through a lot, fellas, so let's have a look at all this again. We've gotten the Senkaku, Ushiro Senkaku, the rear triangle position, and for whatever reason, it's just not there. Maybe the angle's wrong, maybe you're much taller than your opponent and there's just a little too much space around the triangle and the strangle's not there. For whatever reason, it's just not working. First attack is Jujigatame out of the triangle.
Tap.
This is made stronger by putting it behind. The only way he can resist this is by bending his arm. But when he bends the arm, he gives you the American lock. We put the hands here on the triceps and break him. The only way he can resist the American is to bring his fist forward and try to hold his own hands. But when he does this, he gives up a truly nasty Kimura lock. Okay? The only way he can resist this is to try and hold his hands at an angle where neither American nor Kimura is possible. We grab a hold of his fist strongly. We grab a hold of his fist and we lock up and control. Now, with my wrist over his wrist, strong, resistant, I just slap his knuckles right over my wrist. Now from here, I cover his elbow. So there's nowhere for the poor guy to go. As he tries desperately to grab a hold of his own hand and defend himself. That's what it's done. Okay? And in this way, you have a huge number of attacks. 2 versions of Juji Gatame. Kimura, the American lock, and a wrist lock that go in conjunction with the original stranglehold from the back, the Ushiro Senkaku. Now, I'm sounding a car salesman here. There's more. There's more submissions involved in this position. Not only do you have a devastating triangle from the back, but if your opponent ever turns into you, you have a devastating triangle from the front as well. So let's have a look at this. We'll take it from the seat of hidden arms. So for whatever reason, we've found ourselves in this position and we've managed to penetrate his armpit with our foot. We've done a good job of lengthening our training partner's arm, but when it's time to come down in this position, for whatever reason, Placido is able to peel underneath my foot. Okay? And now you're caught in a kind of a weird situation. So once again, I was in here and I can feel I'm starting to lose the position. Whenever we see this, just bring this foot on top of your own ankle. So that as Placido beats my right foot, he loses to my left foot. So once again, there's a battle. He wants to get underneath my foot and there's no rear triangle. So when I feel that's going to happen, I put my own foot on top of my own heel. So that as my right foot gets beaten, my left foot wins. Now I just turn my body the other way. Placido is now caught in a horrible dilemma. If he goes back down to the floor, he goes back down into 3/4 Juji Gatame and gets broken. Why? Because my 2 feet pull up into his neck. So when Placido goes to escape, he can only move to 45 degrees. Go Placido. And then I just turn onto my hip and break him. So what does he have to do? He has to come up into me. But when he comes up into me, it's just such an easy thing for us to lock up the figure of 4. And from here, we get a devastating stranglehold. Placido's only recourse is to try and get up and away. When I see that, I just pull his elbow over my hip and we get a Juji Gatame out of the triangle. Let's have a look at all that again from a slightly different angle. So, here we are. I separate and get the foot inside. As I go to lengthen my opponent's arm, for whatever reason, Placido goes to beat my right foot, but runs into the left foot. I switch my hips. If Placido's head goes to the mat, I go 3/4 Juji. He tries to rotate out and escape. I turn onto a single hip, and then from here, I use a pushing finish, where my left hand pulls and my right hand pushes. Go to turn out, Placido. So left hand pulls, right hand pushes, and it's a brutal, brutal break. Okay? His only recourse is to come back and into me. When I see that go on, I just put my knee in behind his head. As he comes up, he goes into Senkaku, the triangle. If he comes towards me, I strangle. If his head moves up and away, I pull his elbow over the top of my hip, and we get a thoroughly nasty break. Put together, this creates a truly devastating submission sequence. Placido, how about we do the whole thing from start to finish, showing the integration of the pin, elbow penetration, elbow separation into the control position, and then through all the submission holds. Okay, as we've been saying in this video, guys, this is, in my opinion, the single best way to convert a side pin into an almost unstoppable series of submission holds. Very, very high percentage. So, Placido's in place, and we're working here out of a fairly standard pin down on the floor. Okay, so we've done a good job. We've passed his guard, but he's got good body posture. And I'm thinking, okay, how am I going to convert this pin into some submission holds? So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to take the reverse overhook option. I could have gone with the underhook, but I'm going to take reverse overhook option. I get my thumb through underneath my training partner's tricep, just like so, and then from here I block my training partner's hip, and I come around to north-south, changing the angle on my training partner's arms. And as a result, I can go through into that reverse overhook. As a result, I can drive my shoulder all the way through and put tremendous pressure over Placido's diaphragm. Now I increase that pressure by blocking the head, taking short, choppy steps around the corner until I can drive forward. You can feel the pressure on poor Placido's diaphragm. Now as we lock up, I drop my chest underneath his rear deltoid, just like so. Now I turn my hips to face his hips, so when he goes to turn back into me, it's a difficult thing. Now, we knee drop. I pass my foot through that small hole and find myself in one of our favorite attacking positions, controlling him like so. I take my feet in, I get the inside foot position, just inside the armpit. As Placido goes to work his way out from here, we lock up the figure of four. First one here is a good stranglehold. If we get the stranglehold, awesome, it's over. If not, and I see my opponent resisting strongly, I'll look to extend the arm out and get that submission. If it proves insufficient, I'll put it behind my back and get an even stronger submission. If Placido's so strong that he can turn his arm, then we'll turn it into an American lock and break him here. If his hand should slip out, then from here, we'll go in and we'll lock that initial Kimura, taking the hand over our knee and breaking it just like so. If I feel I have control of this man, he's trying to lock his hands, and we're consistently breaking the hands apart, but we can't get the arm extended, then from here we'll slap down on those knuckles and draw them in. We'll trap our training partner's elbow and go into a very strong wrist lock. If for whatever reason he's able to join his hands in these situations, and from here we're not able to get the kinds of submissions that we're looking for, he separates his hands, I just place my foot on top of my own ankle just like so. Poor old Placido says, let me get out of here with a turning escape, but gets caught in a 3/4 Judo Tatami. I turn onto a single hip, coming up, Placido coming up. I turn onto a single hip and I use a pushing finish where my left hand pulls and my right hand pushes. And as a result, we get a brutal break that forces him back into me. As he comes back up, I just slip on by and we lock up the figure of four. If the head comes into me, we strangle. If the head moves away, we break the arm. And in this way, we get a beautiful series of upper body submissions coming out of one position, the seated head and arm, our favorite. Now, we just looked at what is my personal favorite submission sequence out of seated head and arm. This begins with the rear triangle, Ushiro Senkaku, and then we saw a whole range of submissions that came out of that. The reason I like it so much is because the triangle is just such a powerful offensive weapon. It works really well regardless of body type. Even short, thick athletes can use it really successfully because of the change in angle. It's much easier to apply than a front triangle, for example. It leads into so many different submission holds out of the position, so many attacks on the arm and the neck. And it's the quintessential example of using your legs against your opponent's head and arm, which is the best way for smaller, weaker athletes to overcome bigger, stronger athletes. I don't care how much bigger and stronger he is than you. His head and arm aren't stronger than your legs. Okay, life doesn't work that way. So if you can make your legs fight his head and arms, you're going to beat bigger and stronger people. That's why it's my favorite one. Nonetheless, it's not the only one. You got to know the others too. So now let's look at the idea of transitioning from the basic position we started in. Everything starts with side control.
Sorry.
See that? It's been a long day.
I'm trying to save myself some pain. You see what I'm doing there?
So from here, using either reverse overhook or underhook, we can go into the seated head and arm position. Now, in the previous sequence, I demonstrated it out of the reverse overhook, so now I'm going to demonstrate it out of a underhook situation. So Placido is going to have a really good defensive posture here, and we are in a fairly standard form of side control. From side control, we're working here. We take our hand and penetrate through, and we use the 10-finger method to bring our training partner's hand to the outside position. I connect my head to my own hand, so when Placido tries to pommel back in, he can't do it. And as a result, we can pommel through and take that underhook that we're always looking for. Once we get to the underhook, our second hand comes up. If Placido tries to pommel his arm out, it's difficult. The only way he can pommel is suicide, and puts him directly into an American lock. So he's got to patiently wait here. Now, from this position, look how I take my elbow up onto my training partner's sternum. I repeat, I do not want Placido's arm going over my shoulder. That weakens everything. What I want is Placido's bicep on my bicep. You want to be bicep to bicep here. I want my bicep over his sternum, and I want my shoulder over his forearm. From here, I want my ear on my training partner's hip, like so. So when he goes to pull his arm free, it's enormously difficult. Now I stuff Placido's head, and I use my knee to bring his head out of position. Now I walk around my training partner and switch knees. As a result, we find ourselves in the perfect position to go through and lock. Now, from here, I block the head, and I take my short choppy steps around the corner and lock up the figure of 4. I drop my shoulder in behind, and I walk up hip to hip on my training partner. As a result, we can knee slide into good position and find ourselves right back in here. Okay? Now, from this position, I want to get to my opponent's back and start attacking with rear strangleholds. How are we going to do this? Okay? I want a good connection. I don't want him putting my foot between his legs. So I keep my foot well connected in here to the hip. I bring this foot up and I lift Placido's head in this direction. That creates an ability on my part to get my leg through underneath his scapula. So I turn, even if he puts his back hard to the ground from here, it's pretty easy for us to pull him up and get to our shoulder. Now, because my foot is in the right position, it's very easy for me to go directly into the figure 4 body lock, just like so. From this position, we have our arm underneath. We're going to go into our usual gambit, just sitting up towards the camera, Placido. The arm underneath, this arm here over the top. I create the thread of a strangle so Placido has to grab my hand. That sets up my ability to take a cross grip. Now Placido must try and take my cross grip away, but when he does so, he exposes himself to double cross. 2 cross grips controlling him. Okay, so once again, I start here. I threaten a strangle. If Placido doesn't react to the threat, I strangle him. He can't just ignore it, so he grabs my hand. But when he grabs my hand, I can release one and grab the other. Now I have a single cross. Stop. I have a single cross. Okay? He can't accept this. If he stays on single cross, there's no reason why I can't go in and strangle him. There's no reason why I can't take his arm away. So he can't accept this position. He's got to try and take it off. If he does so, he exposes himself from single cross to double cross. From double cross, I pass my foot over his forearm. And as a result, I can put his hand in behind his back. If you're one of those lucky people who has very long legs, you can even trap your whole training partner's arm in here with the figure of 4. If not, just put it behind the back. Now the only thing between you and victory is his chin. So we make a thin fist and we take our thumb. I start behind his ear. Chin down, tight, tight, tight. By starting behind his ear, I can take my high elbow position, strong, 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 and dig it underneath the line of his jaw. Strong. I put my fingers out and I finger walk until my wrist penetrates underneath the chin. Then I flick the wrist up and I shoot my elbow forward. And as a result, we're in the perfect position to strangle our opponent. So once again, from the top, you'll take it all the way through the beginning there. We'll change the angle just a little. We've got a tough opponent here who's got his arms in good defensively responsible position. We've got a crossface and we're locked in just like so. Now from here, I go forward and I penetrate through my training partner's wrist and forearm. As a result, I can lock a 10-finger grip. I use the 10-finger grip to lever his arm out and connect to my own hands. So when he tries to re-pommel back in, very, very difficult and pretty easy for us to come through and capture his arm. If he tries to pommel out of here, the only direction he can go is a very poor direction. So he more or less has to accept this position. I bring my second arm over and I come up. Now I take my training partner's arm, I pin it underneath my shoulder, I bring my ear in close, and I come up to put great weight over his diaphragm, restricting his breathing. I stuff the head, I block it with my knee, and I sweep his knee to the side. I put it behind the second knee. I sit up and lock. I take short, choppy steps around behind my training partner. I lock the figure of 4. I give a little pop with my left elbow so that I can get my chest behind his rear deltoid. Then from this position, I line up with his hips. So if Placido tries to come back, it's awfully, awfully difficult. My knee comes down, foot comes in, and we're in position. For whatever reason, I cannot get the arms apart. This is a good time to go hunting the back instead of the rear triangle. I lift, create space to get underneath and behind. I lock the figure of 4. If my opponent is so thick through the waist and my legs are so short, this is not possible. I simply put my foot across and touch my feet. Let's rotate around, please. So once again, if your training partner has a nice slim waist and your legs are long enough, lock the figure of 4. If your opponent lengthens his leg out, don't be afraid to put it inside. This is also a pretty good grip. If your opponent tries to turn into you, just put your second foot inside the thigh. The only thing you can't permit is to go into this position. This is a disaster. But any body triangle, this is the best. This is the second best. This is the third best. And this is a disaster. You don't want this. Okay, but this is the one you want to work with whenever possible. Now, from this position, if you can't get your legs locked, you've got short, thick legs, and he's got a big, thick waist, then just put your feet like so. Now, from this position, I capture my training partner's primary defensive hand. Why is this the primary one? Because if he grabs my wrist, there's no way I can strangle him. If he grabs this wrist, this won't stop me from strangling an opponent. Okay? So this is the one I have to take out first. Now, when I go to strangle him, he's got to try and control my hand. And as a result, I can't strangle. So what do? I punch down the body, I grab his hand, and I pull away. If he just stays here, doesn't do anything, then I'll capture his arm, and now we strangle him. So he can't just accept it. He's got to do something about it. He's got to try and peel it off and escape. But the moment he goes to peel it off, he gives me control. Double cross. Now I capture and put it behind. We lock up. Both his arms are controlled now. He goes to move his arms around. He's stuck. The only thing he can do is try and hide his chin. So we make a narrow fist, and I find the point behind his ear, and I penetrate behind. I separate my fingers, and I walk across until my wrist penetrates to the index knuckle. Then I lift, and I shoot my elbow right into position. And from here, we strangle our opponent down. Some of you might be asking a good question. If I get my opponent in here and I go to peel the hand off, what if he's smart? And instead of trying to peel my hand off, which gives me double cross, he comes up and blocks my other hand. What do I do now? Don't worry. Just trap this one. Then go over the top, peel it, and guess what? We're right back in a position to strangle. So once again, starting from this position, first things first, capture your opponent's primary defensive hand. Always step number one. If you can't get it with your left, grab it with your right and feed it to your left. Threaten a strangle that if he doesn't react, he gets strangled. If he's an idiot and doesn't react, he gets strangled. So he has to react and grab it. The second he does that, he gives you your first single cross grip. You have one hand and a cross grip. If he doesn't react to the single cross, grip it, stuff it, catch it, and strangle. Okay? If he's got any brains, he's going to try and peel it off. And that gives you double cross, the best position of them all. And a strangle. If he's smart, then from this position, once I get single cross, he's not going to try and peel this hand off, because if he does, he gives me double cross. If he's smart, he's going to try and take this one out. Okay, but when he does that, he still gives you what you want. No matter how he cuts it, you're going to fight through his hands and get to your strangle. So, there you have it, guys. How to turn one of our favorite positions, the seated head and arm, into strangles from the rear. We're working our way through what I believe is the single most powerful control position out of side control. This is the seated head and arm. This creates a situation where you're well balanced, relaxed, and your legs can fight against your opponent's head and arm. The quintessential features of good jiu-jitsu. Now, so far we've looked at the most devastating finishing position, the rear triangle, and a whole series of moves that came out of that. We looked at the idea of attacking our opponent's back and going into strangleholds from the back. Now let's look at the idea of going into the mount. This is one of the best things we can do. We'll take it from this angle here. Okay, using any one of the methods we've looked at so far, I'll demonstrate it coming out of a reverse overhook. It happens to be one of my favorites. From a situation where we start off in a fairly conventional pin in like so. We go through, bring our arm underneath and lock up over our training partner's arm. So when he goes to pull his arm free, it won't be easy. We've got an excellent initial control. Now I block my training partner's far hip and I focus on changing the angle by going around to north-south so that his arm becomes progressively easier to control and attack. From here, we finish up in that good sprawl position, puts a lot of weight over our opponent. We block the back of the head and we take our short choppy steps. We never cross our feet, always short choppy steps around the corner, getting into a good punishing pin position. Then from here, we start that action of getting behind our training partner's shoulder. Once we're behind the shoulder, we connect hip to hip. So if he tries to turn back into us, it's not going to be an easy thing. And from here, we find ourselves right back in that favorite attacking position, the seated head and arm. Now, Placido will just come around.
Yes, sir.
Okay, from here, we're locked up. Everything starts with this. If I can get my feet to the inside position, we already know what to do. But what if we can't? Okay, we're struggling. He's closed his elbows, and you're like, man, there's no way, I can't do this. Well, we just saw how to attack our opponent's back. Now let's look at another fine attacking method. From these kinds of situations, we can often just lift our training partner's head, just like so. And then I can take my foot and bring it underneath my training partner's body. From this position, I go forward on my training partner and punch my arm through. And all we're going to do is capture our training partner's far trap. So I come up like so. Now his head is on a pillow. If Placido tries to bridge and go over that pillow, it's so easy for me to put my hand on the floor and pivot around the corner and close my feet. So that as Placido goes to recover and turn back in, even if his arm comes out over here, he finds himself still caught in those same dreadful positions that we saw in the mounted video. Okay, and from here we can walk our training partner's arm up high. We can access those punishing mounted positions where you can asphyxiate your opponent. He tries to breathe from here. Try to work your way up, Placido. And it's just so tough. So pretty soon they start panicking, moving around, and you're going to find many situations to get knees over the top. And when from situations like this, not so difficult for us to start that action of turning the corner, coming through into all the various submission holds that we saw throughout the mounted video. So it's a great way to convert from one punishing position into another. So once again, from here, he's got good defensive positioning. We start off, we go through and lock up. I block my training partner at the hip. I change my body angle. I go through and start that action of driving up on top. I block my training partner at the head. Short choppy steps around the corner, bringing everything back, locking up, shoulder drop, connecting hip to hip. He goes to walk away from me. I follow the hips until we end up in these great attacking positions. Once we get to a position like so, I find I can't get inside. No problem. I give a little lift and I bring my shin through underneath. From here, I come through and capture my training partner at the head. I put a hand behind me so that if Placido goes to turn into me, I just pull with my left foot, back heel. So that he goes to explosively turn in, my base of support behind always creates that strong mounted position, okay? What I don't want is to be loose with this foot, because now he can straighten his right leg, go under it, and capture it between his legs. That's not what I want. So I'm tight here, back heeling. Placido feels like a hamstring curl in here. I don't want to connect two hands to the head. When I go to get up, he bridges into me. I've got no base behind me. So what I want is this. Hand, back heel. So Placido feels when he goes to turn into me, my hips are off the mat. If my ass is on the mat, I can fall. Back heel, hips. He goes to turn into me, and we've got him. Rotate me. Now, if Placido was no good at jiu-jitsu, I could probably just slide him to karagatame, right? But Placido is very good at jiu-jitsu. And so he will go to explosively pull his arm out. I just touch my elbow to his shoulder. So that as Placido explodes out, he goes right into what I really wanted. The underhook. And now we got him. Now we put him under that pressure that we like so much from this position. So much pressure over the face that he just asphyxiates. So what do they start doing? They start turning, bucking, trying to get out of this dreadful, dreadful position. And what have we got? Oh no, karagatame. So we lock up and strangle. If I see he's turning in the opposite direction, then from here I might well bring my knee over the top of his arm. And as a result, we could go right away into the various triangles and arm bars that we favor. Okay, a lot of details there, so it's uncomfortable and positive.
Yeah.
Just one more time so we can just get some of those details in. Okay, again, transitioning from the seated head and arm into the mounted position. He's got good defensive posture. This is not his first day in jiu-jitsu. He knows what he's doing. So he's got good defensive posture. We've got a basic side control. From here, first things, we bring our arm around and lock, cinching everything in. So when he goes to pull his arm free, it won't be easy. Notice that no matter how tight his arm is defensively, one thing you can always do is get your wrist underneath it. Okay, and that's all I need. Strong, resistant. It's not that hard just to get your wrist underneath your training partner. Okay, now I bring my second arm over and I just hold. Now I lift and bring my arms in so that when he goes to pull his arm out, it won't be easy. It's locked in place. Okay, now we start that action of blocking the opposite hip, changing our body angle until we can start coming up into this good attacking position. Now start turning around the corner, coming in tight, locking, and then from here, shoulder drop, puts my chest behind his shoulder, walking around the corner until we can knee slide. Foot comes in, locking, lifting. Okay, so we instead of having our foot here, we're going to lift and bring our foot through underneath them. Now I punch through and lock right here. Because my hand is behind me and my foot is back heeling into his hip. Never am I loose with the foot where he can just put his foot between his legs. Strong back heel in here, digging into the hip. Hips coming forward and turning up to my knees. So that when he tries to turn back into me, he will always give me what I wanted. With lift, we start that action of transferring into the mount position. Once I can access the head, from here, I can lift and grab, right like so. I start the action of transferring from a low mount to a high mount. Now I shoulder shrug and bring his arm in front. I use my chest to asphyxiate. Okay, so what happens? You start getting strong defensive reactions out of your opponent. Sometimes they'll panic and give you what you really wanted. Karagatame. Sometimes you'll get your knee over the top and start that action of turning up. And as a result, you can come forward into our favorite position, the mounted head and arm, where his head and arm are caught between my knees on the floor. When he goes to yank out, so difficult and relatively easy for us to touch our foot to our own knee. And from here, we just go forward, take his knee off the mat, we lock up the figure of four, and from this position, we just strangle for the finish. Okay? So that gives us an excellent way of climbing out of side control, accessing the seated head and arm, our favorite position, and working our way steadfastly into the mounted position. But not just any mounted position. A mounted position where it's so easy to go right into your first underhook, walk the arm up, and asphyxiate your opponent, and go into the various submissions that we looked at from mounted pin. Now we're looking at what is arguably the best of all the control positions out of side control pins. This is the seated head and arm. It's the ideal way to go from a basic side control pin and start to incorporate your legs to fight against your opponent's head and arm, which is the ideal we're always trying to go towards. Once again, we've got an opponent down in side control. Head towards the camera. From here, we've done a good job of going through, however we've done it, either with the underhook or the reverse overhook, and we've done a good job of drawing our training partner up and getting to a situation where from here, we can maneuver around behind the mat. We lock up on our training partner, we take those short choppy steps that brings us into the figure four grip. Now from here, we shoulder drop and get our chest behind his rear deltoid, connect to his hips, and as a result, we end up in the seated head and arm position. Now, from here, it is obviously possible to go directly into an armbar. The question is, How are you going to do this? Here's one simple way, which I'm sure occurred to many of you as you were watching the video. You can bring your head forward and flip your training partner's head, just like so, with your elbow, okay? So I bring my leg out, and then from this position, I just flip my training partner's head. Guys, if you are going to use this method, it is very important that you bring your knee far away from him. I don't want to have my knee underneath him, and I flip the head, and plus it bridges over my thigh, and now I can't do the Jujigatami. So if you are going to use this method, make sure you get your foot up here, so that when you go to flip the head and he bridges, he goes right into the Juji. Okay, very important detail. Again, if my thigh is underneath his head and I flip the head, I can't do Jujigatami now. I'm screwed. So it's important we block him up here at the shoulder. Okay, then from this position, look how when I flip the head, if he bridges back into me, he just gives me what I wanted. So if he's smart and we use this method, he won't bridge back into you. So now what we need to do is flip the head and bring our forearm in front of our training partner's jaw so that we can get our leg over the top. The second this occurs, we want to put one hand over our training partner, over our own thigh, and bring our knees to a position like so we can control this man. When I see him trying to turn into us and bully us around the mat, you've got an excellent control over him. Now, from here, we're going to feed through and go in the opposite direction and lock up into a stronger form of lock. From this position, look how I can easily feed my leg in, and now we can make a good transition into a 3/4 Jujigatami, where my foot comes to my training partner's neck, the second leg goes over it. And as a result, we can start that action of bringing my elbow up to my training partner's wrist. When he tries to defend himself from here, it's such a difficult thing. And then we can separate our training partner's arms and bring everything through into a fine finishing position. Now, from here, he's going to want to walk out and go into a turning escape. When I see that, I turn onto a single hip. I put one hand on my training partner's wrist. My left hand pulls and my right hand pushes. And we get very, very strong breaks as a result. So the more he tries to turn out, comes up to his knees, does all those things that people do, the easier it is to break him. Okay? So once again, starting with a tough opponent, we'll take it from the seated hidden arm position. Just like so. We don't want to make the rookie mistake, flip the head and have him pin your leg. We want to make sure that our cross-face leg is out of his control. So I put my foot on my training partner's shoulder so that if I flip the head and he tries to bridge, just gives me an armbar. Pretty soon he's going to figure out that bridging isn't the solution in this problem. So when we flip the head, we're going to have to use our forearm to lever his head down and cover it. It's like so. Initially, I'll often go in and control like this. It's fine for you to grab the far arm and then from these kinds of situations, lock up your ankles around your opponent. That's also an excellent option in these positions. If your opponent gets away from this and starts locking up more forearm to forearm, then it still is a good option for us to play with one arm through, like so. Okay. From these kinds of situations, it's often a good idea for us to feed our leg through our training partner's legs. So here we are, we're Jujigatami. I bring my leg back. Very often from here, I'll use my other knee close to his bicep, and now it becomes possible to feed that foot into the gap that we've created. I bring my foot up to his neck, second leg goes over the top, and we've got now the classic finishing position, 3/4 Juji. He goes to spin out. We take everything across the hip, and we get very, very strong breaks as a result. Okay. If you don't like the idea, look at me. If you don't like the idea of feeding the foot through, look up. Another excellent option under these circumstances is to go through and lock your ankles together. Now we go and we're not allowed to grab any 1, 2, or 3 fingers, but we are allowed to grab all of the knuckles together and start peeling our training partner's arms to a situation where we can get control of our training partner's wrist. Now as we start the action of separation, we're going to catch our training partner and put everything through behind our back. Now, as he tries to peel out of here, it's a very difficult thing with those wedges behind his far armpit. And as a result, we get very, very strong breaks. So once again, from seated head and arm, we lock up on our training partner. We take our foot all the way up to our training partner's shoulder. As a result, it's pretty easy for us to control our training partner's head and lock up. Now, we pull the far arm in, and from these situations, we lock up on that figure of four. Let's rotate other way.
My right or my left?
Go left. Okay, this is what I'm looking for. I'm not allowed to grab 1, 2, or 3 separate fingers, but I am allowed to grab all 4 together at the line of the knuckles. And as a result, I can start to separate and get my wrist in front of his wrist. Okay, so he locks up. Look how we get a hold of our training partner and then put our wrist in front of his wrist. As a result, I can start separating my training partner's hands. When he locks in, I want to make sure I draw his arms in towards us, lock, and I set a good wedge around my training partner's far shoulder. And as a result, we can start lengthening out our training partner's arm. As he goes in to defend himself in these situations, there's going to be good opportunities for us to get everything around behind our arm. Now, as he tries to spin out and turn out, I just splay my knees. Okay, very important for this particular variation. My knees splay to control the head. And as a result, we get very, very strong breaks. Another great option.
See your head on?
Under these circumstances, instead of me using this foot to go over my training partner's head, another fine option from here is to lock at our training partner's forearm and separate and bring the foot over in this direction. And as a result, we can go directly into 3/4 juji. When he tries to peel out of here, you're still controlling his arm with the figure 4 hold. So when he tries to hit a turning escape, it's physically impossible. Now, he goes to lock his hands. We come up and control our training partner's wrist. From here, we separate. We've got that good 3/4 juji. He goes to turn out, and we use the pushing finish once again. One hand pulls, one hand pushes, and we get very strong breaks as a result. So we come from the opposite direction. Previously, from here, we were flipping over the head and bringing the right leg over. Now, we're separating his hands and bringing the left foot over. And as a result, we control, the legs come in, he tries to hit a turning escape, can't do it because of the figure 4 hold. Goes back to locked hands, we separate them, he goes to turn out, we go into our right hip and break him. Okay? So those are some fine ways for us to use the seated head and arm to go into very strong Jujigatami attacks.